There are three main categories of theory in comparative politics: political economic theories, institutional theories, and cultural theories. And understanding the difference between these is important because when you know what theory you're looking at, it'll help you really easily compare and contrast them in, for example, an essay that you might have to write for, say, a class on comparative politics. This video briefly describes how each of these arguments work. Political economic theories are also called historical institutional or structural theories. At its core, they argue that a state's historical development, and usually its economic development, shapes its political institution. These theories focus very much on long-term trends and emphasize the stability of political systems. And change, when it happens at unique moments called critical junctures, when the regular rules of the game don't apply. These theories can be criticized for being overly static. In other words, it's very difficult for change to actually occur. It's hard to explain exactly what a critical juncture is and how they happen. They're also criticized for being deterministic. This means that they don't give a lot of credit to individual actors, to actual people, for having agency and for making change on their own. You tend to find political economic theories in historical narratives that give you a really great opportunity to trace the path of an argument, to identify a wide range of causes and what their long-term effects actually are. But cross-national statistics also often feature political economic theories as well. Examples of this type of research that you'll read include Tilley on state formation and war, Evans's argument about developmental states, and Ajimoto and Robinson's book, Why Nations Fail. Institutional theories are pretty straightforward. They argue that institutions, whether formal or informal, shape political behavior and outcomes. In other words, political institutions like constitutions or how a country selects its leader influence how both politicians and citizens make choices and decide on policy. These types of theories often use what's called a game theoretic approach. What this means is that, like the North and Weingast article, they tend to use a lot of really fancy vocabulary that I will always try and stop and define for you. But on the very most basic level, it means that individuals are rational actors. They make decisions based on a cost-benefit analysis that takes into account both the general context and what other actors in a game are also doing. Critics of these theories want to know, hey, where did these institutions come from in the first place? Maybe instead of these institutions causing behavior or a particular outcome, it's whatever caused those institutions that really matters. So that, larger economic and historical factors which gave rise to those institutions in the first place are actually what matter for determining what's going on today. Institutions, according to this criticism, are not a cause, but they are the effect. You can see pretty much any type of research that falls into an institutionalist category. And examples that we are reading right now include North and Weingast. And next week, when we study the state and economic development, the two articles that look at state capacity and corruption in Africa. Both are institutionalist. Finally, I'll briefly mention cultural arguments. Cultural arguments state that culture is what shapes political institutions and behavior. Nowadays, culture tends to be seen more as an intervening variable or a contributing factor as opposed to an actual cause. And the reason for this is that cultural arguments are often used for either racist or authoritarian ends. For example, for a long time there was this argument that because of Confucian traditions, Asians are particularly subservient, and therefore they're really not suited to democracy, so it's best to just keep them under authoritarianism. And these types of arguments have been widely discredited. That said, the positive aspect of cultural arguments is that they actually do take people's opinions into consideration. This research focuses on the general population. And we will see legitimate arguments that use culture as a variable, particularly when we look at theories of democratization. For example, there's a theory that economic development raises the level of education in a country, and that more educated citizens demand more from their government and are more likely to protest for democracy. In terms of the type of research you'll see featuring cultural arguments, these do tend to either be historical case studies or survey research. We aren't reading any cultural theories about state development, but when we get to democratization, when we read about the World Values Survey, that's obviously about culture. So that's just a brief introduction to these three types of theories. Again, what's important here is that you recognize what theory you're looking at, understand what its strengths and weaknesses are, and then can compare and contrast it with other types of theories.